Part two, I apologize. We will be starting off with the structure of personality in psychoanalysis. First, I want to go over that there are certain levels to the Freudian model, which are there are three mental dwellers called the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is basically the seedbed of our basic instincts that generate the psych energy. We are born with the id, but it's totally inaccessible to our subconsciousness. The id transforms the bodily need, such as hunger, thirst, and sex, to psychological tensions. The id is capable of forming mental images and objects in an effort to reduce tensions. However, it has no concept of reality. It has no sense of rationality or morality, but solely operates on the pleasure principle. For example, we get hungry and can generate hunger pains, which our mind then imagines food to reduce the tension of those hunger pains, achieving wish fulfillment ideologies instead of reality based ones. The next is the ego. The ego is not present at birth, but evolves out of the id in early infancy. And unlike the id, which is totally unconscious, the ego dwells on all three levels of the consciousness: the unconsciousness, and the pre consciousness, and the conscious. The ego is capable of distinguishing what is real and unreal and attempts to meet the id's demands by identifying proper objects and appropriate means to reach them. While the id may demand immediate gratification, the ego patiently delays the pleasure principle if necessary for effective and safe resolution of tensions under given circumstances. The ego is based on reality, rational, and self preserving mental processes called the secondary process, in contrast to the primary processes by the id. The ego basically allows us to make rational decisions and to avoid dangerous situations within the external world, and helps subdue the id. The ego is in the habit of transforming the id will into action as if it was their own. Last is the superego, and the superego evolves out of early childhood through the learning of social norms and cultural values, primarily from parents, but continues to develop through adulthood through socialization. The superego has no direct contact with the external reality. It is partially conscious and partially unconscious. The superego is also makes unrealistic demands like the id, but the ego demands is not biological, but it's actually moral and ethical. It attempts to control the ego by conscious. The conscience is formed through experiences with punishment from improper behavior. The ego ideal develops through experiences of reward for proper behavior. Violations of conscience will result in the feeling of guilt and inferiority. It cannot know how to compromise with reality, but strives relentlessly for moral perfection. The ego is kind of caught in between this constant battle between its biological passions, wants, and needs, and the superego's moral, pressures. Next, dynamics of personality. Dynamics of personality are functions of the personality system and how the components of the personality structure work to produce particular personality characteristics. Instincts such as anxiety and defense mechanisms play a role in Freud's psychodynamics. Anxiety is essentially the expression of a retreat from danger, an unpleasant emotional state usually accompanied by feelings of fear and physical sensations and why sensations in responses to a signal of danger. Anxiety is usually only by the ego, which it cannot satisfy. It only comes, or only if you feel, is only fulfilled by the ego. When it cannot satisfy its three masters. So, those three masters are reality anxiety, which is the danger in the external environment, neurotic anxiety, which is dangers in impulse, and moral anxiety, which is conflict with superego. Ego. Neurotic anxiety comes from the unconscious of the internal psyche of the id. Its apprehension is unknown dangers are unrealistic, and Freud believes that real danger involves external conflict. Moral anxiety is a conflict with the superego. A danger is felt when our morals or ethics of the superego standards, thoughts, and actions are violated. It is an inner danger that makes the ego tense. All anxiety has a common function, which is to warn the ego's potential dangers through the tense emotional states of fear and unpleasure. In an attempt to reduce pain, the ego employs various psychological mechanisms of defense. Okay, defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are unconscious mental strategies used by the ego in an effort to reduce anxiety. They serve the purpose of defending the ego from dangers at least temporarily. They rarely eradicate the underlying causes, but just avoids or denies reality. One of them can be repression. Repression is the most basic and pervasive mode of the ego's defense mechanism. It is a mental process that forces anxiety-provoking impulses, ideas, feelings, and events away from the consciousness. The psych energy that is used to restrain the unacceptable impulses is called anti-catbexis. This is energy invested in some particular object or a person that appears to satisfy an instinctual need. The next is reaction formation. This is the inversion process or transforming the original impulses or feelings to exactly the opposite ones. Projection. When one's anxiety-provoking impulses and thoughts are attributed to another person or an external event. This mental process of shifting the burden. Displacement. This is when repressed impulses are shifted from their true object and expressed towards a less threatening, innocent object. Rationalization, which is a very common means of ego defense. Rationalization is a process of finding acceptable reasons or excuses for unacceptable thoughts or actions. Fixation, which is thinking of facing a new or unfamiliar situation, is extremely frightening for some people. They tend to cling to their old web of life for reducing anxiety. Regression. That is a defense mechanism that attempts to take refuge in an earlier stage of development. Under extreme stress, it is not unknown to observe adults behaving like children. Reverting to an earlier age of development would mean to resume the childlike dependency in an unconditionally secure, warm, loving environment like the mother's womb. There's one more that did not make it on there. It's called sublimation. It is a process of rechanneling the misdirected psych energy to psychoculturally valued aims. Oh, I'm long-winded. All right, y'all, just letting you know, we got like 10 more pages in total, 30 more slides. So you can stick around if you want to, or you can just pause the video wherever you need to look at some information. Okay. But I will next go over the psychosexual development. This is also made by Freud or Freud. The Freudians model a personality development is based on the assumption that personality is largely determined during the first 4 to 5 years of one's experience. The libido or libio is located in various parts of the body, such as the mouth, anus, genital regions. Freud called these areas of erotic pleasure or in excitations within the organism's exogenous zones. A growing child passes through a series of psychosexual stages, proceeding from oral to anal to anus to phallic and to the genital stage. The oral stage, we'll start off with, is the first stage that is about when a child is about 12 to 18 months of life. The newborn infant's pleasure sensations enter around the mouth, such as the lips and gum and tongue. Is an example would be when a child is breastfeeding, the infant reduces not only hunger pains, but all. This is what Freud said, that but also experiences autoerotic pleasure after developing teeth, biting and chewing. It is thus another source of oral pleasure, but it can also be used to vent frustration. If a person tends to fixate on oral needs, they may develop oral characteristics, and he said those characteristics are optimism, dependency, impassivity, a whole bunch of more etc. The next stage is the anal stage, when the child is about 1 to 1.5 years of age. The infant's erogenous zone shifts from oral to anal region. The primary erotic gratification is achieved by defecation and urination in this stage that lasts until they're about 2 or 3 years old, depending on its toilet training processes of general society. A child can get fear and anxiety for not fulfilling parental expectations about his or her toilet habits. Freud said that the first gift that a child can make is defecation. If the child is punished over defecating in the wrong time in the wrong place, the child may grow anxiety and may defecate in the wrong place at the wrong time to vent frustrations and start to manipulate the reality by controlling the anal function. Depending on the nature of the toilet training, anal personality traits can manifest as stinginess, stubbornness, excessiveness, cleanliness, and punctuality. The next stage is... Oh, did I not write it down? Hold on. Oh, I did write it down. Okay. The next stage is the phallic stage. This is where differences between the sexes occurs. For the first time in a child's life, the genital area becomes the main erogenous zone for both sexes. That anatomical differences between sexes are important, but more importantly, psychosexual development of the child at this stage centers around the penis rather than the vagina. The child perception changes at this stage begins at the third year of life and lasts about 2 to 3 years. Just children start to notice that there's differences between sex. The next thing we'll be talking about is the Oedipus. I know I'm pronouncing this wrong. Yeah, Oedipus complex or Oedipus. At this stage, the male develops. This is what Freud explains his perception of the Oedipus complex is that at a certain stage, the male develops a sexual attraction towards his mother and wants to displace the father. But Freud's biographies suspect that this complex is just a reflection of himself. And at some point, he says that boys notice that girls don't have penises. So the assumption that he wrote the assumption that a girl's penis falls off, which led him to be castrated by his father because he desired his mother, which led him to repress those urges. He also concluded that girls have kind of the same thing, but also different. It's called the Electra complex. This is where a female is envious of a penis and her desires lead her to be hostile with her mom, for she wants to share. But over time, it's resolved as the girl realizes the desires are impossible and they turn into non-sexual desires. According to Freud, women see themselves as inferior and their superego is weaker because of how long the process lasts. The phallic character manifests in bipolar terms, depending on the matter in which the Oedipus complex is resolved, such as proximity, vanity, timidity, mama recklessness, self-hatred, and celibacy. The phallic personality type may seek success on the job, many sexual conquests, and many children as evidence of his potency, or he may be impotent in his work and sexual life because the guilt over competitive strivings with the father. Next stage is the latency stage. From the age to about 5 to 6 until puberty, the child's sexual development will become latent due to mainly to parents and other adults' suppression in the child's internal feelings of guilt, shame, and morality. The last one will be the genital stage. This is the first stage of the psychosexual development, where the psychosexual development begins. And it begins about at age 12 with reanimated sexual impulses of the earlier pre-genital stages, but the genital sexuality is directly different from the earlier stages. The person has developed a full capacity to love self and others by investing libido in gender-appropriate sexual activities and sublimated to social, cultural, and value goals. Next is the psychopathology in therapy. The Freudian psychopathology basically concerns the ego's conflict with its three masters, like we've gone over before. The psychopathology basically concerns the ego's that was repeated. The ego must perform the crucial role of coordinating the instinctual demand. Freud says a healthy person's ego is both strong and flexible, and that a well-adjusted person should be able to live and work eros in sublimation. A person who has an imbalance, he says, is subjected to neurosis or to be a psychopath. Or yeah. He says that the cause of neurosis is deeply rooted in the process of psychosexual development, as we have discussed in the terms of the Oedipus complex. Also, fixation, regression, and other pathogenic defenses. The main goal of the psychoanalytical theory is to keep the patient uncover, recall, and regenerate unconscious materials so they can deal with it consciously. There are two famous techniques of uncovering the unconscious materials that we have in our mind. Those are called free association and dream analysis. To finish off Freud, a couple of things. He said that the basic foundation of personality is your personality is shaped mostly during the pregenital stages and matures at the genital stage. The genital stage begins puberty and continues throughout life, but Freud never actually specifically put any subsequent stages of his personality development, as if no significant changes or conflicts would take place in middle or after adulthood. Freud created an ingenious philosophy, this philosophy that we've been talking about, that's around art rather than science. He recognizes the important role of culture is regulating human behavior, but still the prime cause of human conditions is instinct. There's a lot of people who disagreed with a lot of things that he said and challenged the things that he said. There's one sociologist, his name was from. He said that society could satisfy the following basic human needs. And he disagreed with Freud. A need for relatedness, a need for transcendence, or a need for rootness, a need for identity or fame or reference. This is depending on the nature of the social structure, economic system, and the culture above the needs. It depends on which culture, which environment that you are brought up in. And that also determines differently what satisfies you as a person. And with that produces various social characteristic types, such as receptive, exploitive, hoarding, marketing, and productive. Moving away from Freud, we will be talking about Skinner and his behaviorism. Behaviorism goes over basically why we do what we do is largely determined. It says that it's largely determined by the unique underlying psyche of apparatus of each individual. Behavior is when an organism responds to environmental contingency at a given moment, rather than caused by enduring internal characteristics developed within a person since birth. Anything. According to Skinner, one of the pioneers of American behaviorism, behavior is what an organism is doing, you're doing, or more accurately, what is observed by another organism to be doing. And this is largely looked at in ABA. Not looking at, when we describe behavior, it's not what a person is, but it's the action of that person. And behaviorism concerns the universal law of cause and effect as the principle governing the behavior of any organism. The main focus of behaviorism is thus in the modification of behavior rather than on the analysis of enduring personality. We cannot see someone's personality or per se, but we can observe, predict, and even control one's responses in a given environment, a natural scientific approach to human behavior. Responsive and apparent behavior. Skinner differentiates behavior into two categories, respondent and apparent. A respondent behavior is either an unconditional or conditioned response elicited by a specific stimulus or stimuli. This later is called classical conditioning. It is a goal conditioning in which formerly is neutral stimuli becomes a conditioned response because the unconditioned stimulus is tied to salvation. Whether unconditioned or conditioned, respondent behavior is, however, a passive reflex elicited by stimulus. Human behavior is more complicated than just simple reflexes. Skinner proposed apparent behavior that is behavior that operates upon the environment to generate consequences, saying that we are not always passively reacting to stimuli, but also actively doing something which will affect the environment to bring certain results that in turn would affect our subsequent behavior. Punishment refers to either the presentation of negative stimuli or the removal of positive ones. According to Skinner, human behavior can accurately be predicted when reinforcement conditions are strictly controlled, but he is not certain about the outcome of punishment conditions. He says the effects of punishment are less predictable than of reinforcement. Punishment merely suppresses behavior temporarily, but not necessarily lead to an alternative behavior. He considers punishment a poor technique of behavior control. Punishment, by presenting a strong adverse stimulus, tends to result in avoidance of the child and withdrawal reactions. It conditions negative feelings such as fear and anger into the child and can rationalize negative feelings between the punished and the punisher. For Skinner, age was a poor indicator of behavior, which is something that was different from Freud's or Freud, where he was more of like a biological thing. Skinner is not. He says this because individual differences outweigh our age differences. He believes that we don't need such a concept or construct as personality growth or developmental stages, since our behavior is largely shaped or reshaped by contingencies of reinforcement at any given moment in time. A very blank slide. The shaping of behavior. Shaping is also something used in ABA. Is thus a procedure of fine-tuning behavior by rewarding to the desired goal. Skinner believed that this shaping procedure can be applied to all organisms, including humans. One shape such yet apparent behavior can become part of the individual's reinforcement history and repertoire. So, basically rewarding a child after everything they do right and do good. Just positive reinforcement. This one's a little small. Schedules of reinforcement. This is the further maintenance or change of shape behavior depends on the schedule of reinforcement. Sometimes timing and sequence of reinforcement is more important than the nature of the reinforcer. Like as if you're reinforcing a child for doing something good, sometimes it's better to do it right away, do it quickly, than to, wait on it, because that kind of, I guess, mess things up. The reinforcement schedule is divided into two types of continuous reinforcement and enforcement, then intermediate reinforcement. Continuous reinforcement is reinforcement is given after every correct response, like I was saying. And intermediate reinforcement is a response not reinforced continuously but occasionally. Using intermediate reinforcement schedules tend to produce behaviors that are more resistant to instinct than continuous reinforcement schedules. Since intermediate reinforcements are unpredictable, one's behavior persists on an expectation for the next possible reward, even though a long time has elapsed since the last reward. In Skinner's behaviorism, the study of an individual's reinforcement history is the only area that comes closest to the conventional concept of personality development. We're on slide 16. We're almost halfway there. 16 out of 28. But we will be going over maladjusted behavior and modification. In the place of psychopathology and psychotherapy, Skinner refers to disadvantages or dangerous behavior and just behavior therapy or modification. The object of Skinner's behavior therapy is therefore to remove or modify the subject's maladjusted behavior by providing new effective contingencies of reinforcement. For Skinner, the question of how any behavior can be shaped or altered is more important than the question of why. Alternatives to radical behaviorism. Social learning theories. To wrap up on Skinner. Hold on, I'm sorry. Skinner's primary concern is to manifest symptoms of maladjusted Ooh, I think it's maladjusted behavior rather than latent cause. For Skinner, the symptom itself is the problem. Observational learning, sometimes called modeling, this is another thing used just like shaping. Modeling is more than a simple copying or mimicking behavior. We usually do not automatically imitate others' behavior, but we select our models with certain behavior patterns and modify them into new patterns. Human observational learning involves active cognitive processes, in contrast to passive imitate behaviors among animals. This is a theory by a sociologist. Her name was Bandera. To continue on with Bandera, she states that animal behavior is different from human behavior in that human behavior is not only influenced by the environment, but also regulated by the person's internal standards, which have been acquired through the direct reinforcement from one significant other, and also through the indirect various reinforcement from generalized others. These self-regulatory and self-reflective personal standards thus functions as the mediator between the person's behavior and environment. She also emphasizes the important function of self-efficiency in manipulating one's environment. Self-efficiency refers to one confidence that he or she is capable of performing a certain desired behavior in a given situation. According to her, Bandera, self-efficiency is acquired and varies with one interactions with environmental factors and behavioral experiences. Self-efficiency can be increased or decreased by manipulating the environmental and behavior factors that is directly experiencing one's own successful performance or observing someone else's successful performance. Behavior outcomes also depend on the strength of self and self-sufficiency and responsiveness of the environment. She hypothesizes for possible situations by combining the high or low efficiency and the high or low environmental responsiveness. And that is it for Bandera. Slide 18. We got 10 more slides left. If you're still here, congratulations. The phenomenological, I'm surprised you're still here. I'm sorry. The phenomenological theory encompasses various humanistic and essential theories on personality. Man does not have the characteristics of a machine. This was actually said by another sociologist named, I pronounce his name, Mitchell. And he suggested 5 major cognitive variables. Some of them can be competencies and encoding strategies, experiences, and subjective values. But to continue on with the phenomenological reduction, or phenomenology, it is an act of eliminating or society is eliminating or suspecting all assumptions and beliefs that influence our perception and cognition so that we can understand the values sense of human consciousness. Another sociologist's name is Husserl, 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 said that there is no phase or aspect of human consciousness that appears in by itself. Consciousness is all of consciousness of something. This, in short, says that a social scientific perspective phenomenology is the study of cognitive reality, which is embodied in the process of subjective human experiences. The phenomenological perspective consists of the following: one of the person's free choice, voice and perception of cognition, the subjective meaning and experience as one's reality, and holistic view. A personality in the process of becoming. Actually, that's the last one. In short, we first choose what we think we know and do. We do not perceive everything around us, but selectively depending on our own personal need, interest, and concern. We reject and change our environment and even create a new one by constructing new meaning for our life. World in reality is what we make it to be through our subjective experience here and now. Personality is therefore not merely determined by instinctual needs or environmental stimuli, but a formative process of becoming a whole person. Hang on, y'all. We almost there. Oh, wait. Oh, might have switched this around. This was actually supposed to go beforehand with shaping. I'm going to just say it real fast. Shaping is thus the procedure of fine-tuning behavior by rewarding the desired goal. We've gone over that. Oh, wait a minute. There's a couple of slides that were put in wrong places. I will post up all the information after this. But the slide we should be on, Person-Centered Theory by Carl Rogers. Rogers has an image himself of the person. It's very quite optimistic and active. He says that all organisms have an inherent tendency to maintain enhanced quality of life to the fullest. In other words, every organism has a force to grow and actualize its constructive potential. Core constructs of personality. Since Rogers' person-centered theory primarily concerns personality change and growth, the structural aspects of personality is less elaborate than from its elaborate Freud, the first person we went over, cycles analysis. In Rogers' perspective, reality is subjectively experienced rather than objectively structured, saying that human organisms exist because of its biological structure. Oh wow, what happened? Saying that human organisms exist because of its own biological structure, which continually expresses its changing life. The organism is thus not a stable structure, but a dynamic process of experiencing new phenomena. So we're not robots. We are experiencing experiences because we are humans For Rogers, therefore, the basic source of personality is the phenomenal field of that is in the inner subjective world experienced by the organism. Thus saying that the organism is not strictly a biological structure, but psychophysical gestalt, which experiences constantly with the external and internal worlds. To simply put all that, the self is an awareness of the person that he or she exists as a separate being from other people's thinking and entities. Moreover, the person has a distinct image or concept about what he or she would like to be. The self emerges through the psychalization organization process to evaluate interaction with significant others and symbolization of the I or me related experiences. Evaluate interaction means through interaction with significant others, we learn to value certain experiences which appear to meet others' approval. The formation and development of self or gestalt depends on how self experiences are symbolized. That is how the meaning of one's experience is interpreted. Reference and conceptualization in the relation to I and me. As experiences occur in a person's life, they are either accepted into consciousness or incorporated into the self structure because they meet a need of self, or ignore because there is no perceived relationship to this relationship of self, or denied or distorted because the experience is perceived as inconsistent with the self structure. Three more slides. Yay, we're almost done. Okay, so personality development. Personality development is no specific development phase or stages are characterized by Rogers, but instead his emphasis lies in the internal force of personality growth. The direction of maturation and conditions influence the maturation process. In short, everyone is born with this internal force for growth and capacity to actualize one's self-potential, but actually a realization of this tendency depends on certain conditions of our socialization process. This adequacy or symbolization is in turn dependent on the consistency between what we actually experience and what we perceive as the experience. Nevertheless, the introjected values of significant others eventually become part of one's personality and serve as stranded or judged one's own worth and values. Self-regard is thus affected by the conditional positive regard. For whatever the reasons, if one grows up with experiences of distrusting or ignoring his or her own one's values, this may indeed develop into the person who cannot accept himself directly and hence constantly suffers from the incongruence between genuine organistic experience and introjected self. The ideal point of healthy personality development in his eyes is a basic sick congruence between the phenomenal field of experience and the conceptual structure of the self. A situation which is archived would represent freedom from internal strain and anxiety and freedom from the potential strain, which would represent the maximum and realistically orientated adaptation. And this will mean that the establishment of the individualized, visualized value system having considerable identity with the value system of any other equally well-adjusted member of the human race. I hope you guys understood that, because I didn't. Oh, wait. Oh no, wrong one. Well, I'm gonna wait for a couple of seconds. This is what I just went over. All right, next. Person-centered psychopathology and therapy. The incongruence between organism experience and self makes the person feel anxious and unsure of one's purposeful direction. In attempt to relieve anxiety, such a person would tend to use defenses such as denial and distortion of experiences that are inconsistent with the concept of self. These defenses are not conductive for self-actualization, but rectify the false self-concept and eventually lead to more pathological defenses in the maladjusted behaviors, such as you realize your compensation delusions and paranoia. You become paranoid. When such things become overwhelming, your paranoia, defenses fail to protect the self structure completely. The personality disorganization would ensure a disorder equivalent to psychosis. The primary task of this therapy is to help the client give up the defense so that he or she can change and recognize the self-concept to be consistent with the true organismic experiences and accepts a part of his or her reality that cultural values place upon suppression of these cravings will be accepting and assimilating all the sincere evidence experienced by the organism in this connection. That was a long speech. In order for the cognitive change in a personality integration to take place, the client must perceive the therapist as having three essential qualities of characteristics. One is genuineness, second is unconditional positive regard, and the third is empathy. It's everything that you want in a therapist. The therapist must be perceived by the client as a person who cares about the clients unconditionally I apologize, I lost my place. Without any judgment, reservations, or possessiveness. This environment allows the client to change and recognize his or her own concept without any pressure or constraint from the therapist. Empathy provides the client with a profound sense of being understood by the significant other, and therefore the client must likely feel safe and comfortable to self-disclose. In short, the fully functioning person is an ideal type of healthy person who is continually moving towards higher and higher levels of actualization. What a dream. I believe this is the last slide. Yay. Yippee. Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. This is an optimistic view of human nature, innate goodness, and innate forces for growth, potentials for self-actualization, and dynamic gustal of guess deal of human personality based on subjective freedom and meaning of choice. Maslow's theory focuses on what's right about a healthy personality rather than what's wrong. According to Maslow, an ideal model of the healthy person in this fully growing and self-fulfilling human being, the one is in whom all his potentialities coming to full development, the one whose inner nature expresses itself freely rather than being wrapped, suppressed, or denied. In short, healthy personality is a process of growth towards self-actualization. In Maslow's hierarchy of needs is based on assumption that human beings are motivated by 5 universal basic needs that can be satisfied in a higher goal order in terms of priority or relative potency of the need. Lower levels need to be satisfied before higher levels can emerge. These basic needs are in order of their potency, psychological safety, belongingness, love, esteem, and self-actualization needs. And to finish this up, I will be going over all 5 of those. To start off, at the tippy top is the psychological needs. Or that's at the bottom, I think. Psychological needs are the most potent of all needs and are essential for human survival, such as food, water, and oxygen. The emergence of all other needs is dependent on the gratification of psychological needs. Thus, the meaning of survival needs is prerequisite for all the human motivation. You can't be happy if you aren't satisfied with your physical needs, such as being hungry, because you will be constantly on survival mode. Next will be the safety needs. These needs include security, stability, dependency, freedom from fear, anxiety, and chaos, need for structure, order, law, limits, strength, and the protector, and so on. We all need to feel safe. Next, the belongingness and love needs. This is the third potent need. We are social creatures in nature, and rather than biological and physical, as in the previous 2 lower levels need, included in the belongingness love needs are intimate feelings of tenderness, affection, caring, and sharing, ecstasy, responsibility with close persons. Next, the esteem need. When belongingness and love needs are satisfied, esteem needs become active. The esteem needs may be divided into 2 subjects: the desire for strength and achievement, adequacy, mastery, and competency, confidence in the independence and freedom. Having confidence in yourself is very important. That's what it's saying. The second is the desire for reputation or prestige, status, dominance, recognition, attention, importance, or appreciation. Last one, the need for self-actualization. This refers to the man's desire for self-fulfillment, namely to the tendency for him to become actualized on what he is potentially. Maslow identifies that one does not have to satisfy a particular need 100% in order to move on to the next needed satisfaction, and therefore most of the normal persons in our society are particularly satisfied in all their basic needs, and partially unsatisfied in other basic needs at the same time. So we do not have to be 100% satisfied in our physical needs to move up and experience other needs, such as the safety, the belongingness, the love, but all of them are important. Well, thank you for being here. That's it.